Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to this year's NDEAM virtual training. NDEAM stands for National Disability Employment Awareness Month and is an opportunity each October to celebrate the important role that Americans with disabilities play in the diverse American workforce. So today we're going to start with a video to just share the theme of NDEAM this year and a little bit more about it.
Every day, people with disabilities can and do add value to America's workplaces and economy. Each October, during National Disability Employment Awareness Month, or NDEAM, we celebrate the contributions of these workers with disabilities. We also reaffirm our commitment to ensuring all Americans, including Americans with disabilities, can put their skills and talents to work. Reflecting the important role disability plays in workforce diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, the theme for NDEAM 2022 is disability, part of the equity equation. Indeed, a disability-inclusive workforce is a strong workforce, and today, more and more leading employers across the U.S. are realizing this and reaping clear, bottom-line benefits as a result. Specifically, companies identified as leaders in disability inclusion had, on average over a 4-year period, 28% higher revenue, double the net income, and 30% higher economic profit margins than their counterparts. NDEAM is an annual opportunity to educate people about these benefits, celebrate progress made, and most importantly, commit to building a stronger, more equitable, and inclusive workforce going forward. It is led by the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Disability Employment Policy, or ODEP.
Awesome, thank you. So as you just heard, this year's theme for NDEAM is disability, part of the equity equation. I absolutely love the theme chosen for this year and how we can all participate in events like these to spread awareness of the irreplaceable contributions made by individuals with disabilities to a strong workforce. And what happens when a valuable employee on our team acquires a disability? And hearing from our keynote speaker today and our panelists, we hope that you leave this event with a greater understanding and awareness of the role disability plays in an equitable workforce, the value in hiring and retaining employees with disabilities, and resources and accommodations available. Today, attendees will be muted for the presentation, but if you have any questions, please add them to the chat box. There will be a set time at the end of today's event to answer any questions you may have for our keynote speaker or for our panelists. And a big thank you to Kamisha Martin and Ron Hanners for leading the planning of this event again this year. So without any further delay, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. His name is Army Sergeant First Class Michael Schlitz. After 14 years of service, Michael Schlitz medically retired from the United States Army in March of 2010. Throughout his military career, he served in several positions from rifleman to platoon sergeant. In addition to his Purple Heart, Schlitz has received several meritorious service medals, Army Commendation Medals, Army Achievement Medals, and Good Conduct Awards, among others, each a reflection of his proud service to our country. In February of 2007, Schlitz and his platoon were in southern Baghdad performing a basic road clearing mission to identify IEDs when 2 artillery shells attached to a propane tank exploded. Though Schlitz was thrown from the vehicle and survived, the blast killed his driver, gunner, and medic. Schlitz not only lost his platoon brothers that day, he also sustained burns on 85% of his body, lost the vision in his left eye and both of his hands. In the years following that life-altering moment, Schlitz has personally committed to live a better life for the friends he lost that day, a life they would be proud of. In his mission to give back to veteran and ranger communities, Schlitz regularly travels the country for speaking engagements and veteran events. Since the injury, he has returned to Iraq 3 times to mentor wounded and non-wounded veterans, supported the establishment of multiple new nonprofit organizations, and had the honor of speaking in front of Congress on issues facing veterans today. Schlitz will continue his quest until every service member comes home safely. Michael Schlitz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'd like to first off just thank you guys for giving me the privilege, one, to share my story and some of my experiences as somebody who has disabilities in the workforce. I'm going to start off kind of with my story of the Army, because it kind of explains a little bit more than just the bio, how I received my disabilities. So I came in the Army in 1996, kind of a rebellious teenager. I was well aware I was kind of too immature to go to college right off the get-go, not knowing what I wanted to do as an adult. And I just found it wouldn't be productive enough for me. So I didn't want to just go work a factory job. I knew I needed something kind of greater than that. So I looked to my older brother who was serving in the Army as an example of what I could do next, that I could go in the Army, do 3-4 years, get the GI Bill, and hopefully kind of know what direction I want to take my life. What I wasn't prepared for is once I got in the military, how much I would actually love it. I fell in love with the routine, the discipline, and of course the challenges. The challenges that you face as an individual, and then later on in my career, challenges that I faced as a leader, trying to mentor and coach my subordinates. And so when the beginning part of my career, I got the opportunity to go to a lot of schools, kind of professionally develop myself as a leader before 9/11 actually ever happened. So pre 9/11, the focus for leaders was really taking care of our subordinates, their morale, their welfare, their families, and it really taught me a lot. I was serving in Korea on a reconnaissance unit when 9/11 happened, but I happened to be on vacation, and I was married at the time, and my ex-wife now, she was over there visiting me. When just south of the Korean Peninsula, there's an island. It's their version of Hawaii called Jeju, and we had just flown back into Seoul um, just for one night, and we were supposed to fly out to Bali the very next day, and we decided to get dinner. And during dinner, we're watching football on TV, and then we saw the first plane go into the tower. And initially, our thought was, okay, they put on a movie. Let's turn the football game back on. And then we saw the second tower get hit, and I knew instantly it was real. And I told her, we got to go. I got to go get my work phone out of the hotel room. And we jumped in a cab, got back to the hotel, and there was missed calls. There was messages saying, hey, no matter where you're at in the world, vacation's over, time to come back to work. And being in Korea was a different experience than being stateside, because we knew it was real, but our focus being on the towers and the attack, that we didn't know what North Korea was going to do with our attention elsewhere. So we started running real world missions very close to the border. And from that point on, we knew it. The way that we knew in the military, our way of life was about to change. And for infantry guys, we're kind of excited, and kind of a demented way, because this is what we trained for. This is all we ever wanted, was to be able to go to combat and kind of test our grit. And unfortunately, I didn't get my opportunity. Instead of going to a deploying unit, I got sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, to be a ranger instructor. And I didn't get my first chance to deploy until 2006, when the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq had already been waging on for a while. So I got stationed in Fort Drum, New York, with 10th Mountain Division. I got there in March of 2006, deployed in August 2006 to the southwest side of Baghdad, into an area we call the Sunni Triangle. And if you've watched the media during that time frame, it was also called the Triangle of Death because of the number of casualties and wounded we were taking during that time frame. And just a brief history on the kind of the way Iraq looked is early on in 2003, 2004, we didn't take a lot of casualties. We didn't have a lot of killed in combat because the enemy didn't know how we operated. And they're a smart enemy just like we do. They observe us, they find our weaknesses, and then they started attacking us. And in 2005, we started to see our casualty rate go up and our killed in actions go up because they started finding our weaknesses, and that the roadside bombs, the dismounted devices, the vehicle-borne IEDs, which is explosive implemented device. And so the U.S. response to that was, we'll triple the number of soldiers we have on the ground and do a big sweep across the country. And with that, when you have that many people over there, we saw the casualty rate and the killed in action triple now, to the most violent time that we saw in Iraq. And so that was the time frame I was there. And on a daily basis, if we're in a vehicle, we'd see or hear multiple of those roadside bombs, those IEDs going off every day. And then that was without, if I were to stay in one spot for 24 hours, I'd hear between about 60 and 80 engagements within earshot. So that could be gunfire, that could be mortar rounds going off, artillery, roadside bombs. And that was every single day. And about halfway through my deployment, I went from being a ground infantry guy to being attached to an engineer unit. And our kind of two platoons flip-flopped, and they took over my sector and I took over their mission. And so now my mission became to go clear roads with the engineer force of those IEDs, those roadside bombs, so that follow-on forces could come up behind us and continue their missions. And on 27 February 2007, we started out for about a 15-hour patrol to clear multiple roads in our area. And it was like any other day. I can remember waking up, getting the guys ready, checking their equipment, giving them mission briefs, checking weapons, and then rolling out. And we had already cleared a few roads as sun was starting to kind of come up. We had just finished clearing a dead end road. We got the vehicles turned around and started coming back up the road. And I can hear it to this day. I remember hearing the boom. And before I could even react to it, I remember hitting the ground. And I kind of hit my head and my shoulder and kind of tumbled a little bit when I hit the ground. And that's what we call an ambush. So an ambush is a surprise attack. And in training, they always say when you're ambushed, you just need to take a split second to figure out what's going on, where's it coming from, what just happened, and then react. And you don't get much time to do it. So my initial reaction was just, I looked up at my vehicle and what I didn't see was my guys. So I instantly just started running for my vehicle to go check on my men. And as I got closer to the vehicle, that's when I felt the flames hit me in the face and I realized I was on fire. And I felt like the majority of the flames were right in the torso area. We had body armor, so I decided to try to get as much of it off of me as quickly as I can. So I dropped my body armor, and then just like we've been taught since kindergarten, drop and roll. But what I didn't know at the time or take into consideration was in the explosion was propane. And so, excuse me, every time I would roll, the propane would reignite on my uniform, and I just stayed burning to the point where my muscles kind of locked up on me. And I was face down in the ground of Iraq, and I was just thinking, all right, this is it. This is where I'm going to die. And as those kind of feelings and thoughts were kind of coming over me, I could start to hear my guys in the distance from the vehicle that was in front of us. And I knew they would be about maybe a little bit more than a football field away. So I figured by the time they got to me, there wasn't going to be a whole lot they could do. And before I knew it, I felt the cooling sensation of the fire extinguisher they had brought with them to put me out. And kind of two things came over me at that precise moment. One was that extreme amount of cold hit my body, just kind of took the pain of burning alive away. And then the second part of it was the emotional side of saying, okay, my guys are here, they're taking care of me. Now I'm not going to die in Iraq. I still have a fighting chance. And the minute they put me out, they got me on a spine board to get me away from the vehicle. The vehicle was covered in flames by this point. We had spare ammunition and grenades and kind of like rocket launchers in the vehicle, and you could hear some of those rounds starting to cook off. And guys were still trying to get to my men in the vehicle. Unfortunately, my gunner who was up in the turret, Sergeant Susanka, my medic who was in the back seat behind the driver, Sergeant Cadavero, we believe they died instantly. But my youngest, Corporal Lauren Henry, who was my driver, we know he burned alive in the vehicle because he couldn't escape. And there was really no way for my guys to get to him and get them out. And so they're trying to do all that while still trying to take care of me. And by this point, you know, um, the pain had kind of gone away, and I was back to focusing on what was going on. So I was telling the guys, hey, look, we got to get security up. We got to start sending missions up to higher. And I went right back to work. But what, I didn't really see going on is my guys were already doing all those things. We have trained and trained and trained that if one of your leaders goes down, that the next guy up takes charge. And so all that was going on. So from time of impact to the time the helicopter touched down to get me was 10 minutes. And I always say that because I just think that's the capabilities that our U.S. forces have now. Like any other time frame, and in other conflicts, it might not have been that way, and I probably wouldn't have made it. And so from time of the impact of the vehicle to the time I went into my first surgery in Baghdad was only 30 minutes. And so, I mean, the capabilities, the training, my guys on the ground, the medical staff, I mean, they all took their part in making sure I had a fighting chance to stay alive. After multiple surgeries in Baghdad, about 24 hours later, they sent me to Landstuhl, Germany. They had to stabilize me in Landstuhl, Germany for about another 24 hours and another surgery. And then they put me on a plane back to the United States to San Antonio, Texas, to the Brooke Army Medical Center, which is the premier burn center for the military. There I spent 6 months in ICU. The first 4 months, I really have no recollection of it because of a medically induced coma. And the parts that I do remember aren't the most pleasant. I was still going through skin grafts and trying to get my body covered from the majority of my body was burned. So what you can see in my body, on my arms, my face, I mean, that's basically my entire body. And the few good areas that I had, that's where they had to take the skin grafts from and cover the rest of my body. And that was a very prolonged and kind of painful experience. After 6 months, they moved me to the step down ward, to the burn ward, where now the focus became physical therapy. I had to learn how to walk again. They had to get my size back up. They had to get my health. I was still having infections and different things going on. And I spent about another 5 months in that ward. And then just shy of a year, I was finally released from the hospital to go. Basically, I got a small house and I was able to go home every day, but I had to come back to the hospital every day for more therapy. And as time went on, then it became occupational therapy, which is, physical therapy is like basically kind of operational, making sure that you can do the little things that you can do. And occupational therapy is your everyday activities, from hygiene to cooking to getting dressed, all those things. But during that point in time, I was still healing. A lot of the skin grafts hadn't fully cultured, and I didn't have prosthetics. So as you can see on this arm, basically that's how I was on both sides. So I couldn't really do anything for myself. I couldn't feed myself. I couldn't trust myself. Um, so all that had to be done for me, and obviously that impacted my mental health. Um, I was very suicidal at the time. Um, for somebody who could do all those daily things, I could think of a million ways to still kill myself. Um, and really, it was because I was struggling with not being able to do those things, but then identity crisis of, if I can't be a soldier, what am I going to be? I couldn't think about 3 years down the road, 5 years down the road, um, to when life could get back to some level of normalcy. And that went on until I got my very first prosthetic. And it was very similar to this one. It rotates and open and closes. And that night I got to go home and feed myself for the first time. And I think that for me was the first bright spot that I really felt that, okay, I'm finally accomplishing something. And luckily for me, I had my military buddies, fellow veterans, my family and friends all taking care of me. My mother came to live with me to help me as my caregiver. So I was always surrounded by support and encouragement. And so oftentimes I'd have these conversations with my mother about, what am I going to do? If I can't be a soldier, I can't just stay home every day and do nothing. She's like, there's a lot of things you could do. Maybe you could write a book. I'm like, look, I'm not going to write a book. I don't even like reading that much, let alone write a book. Um, and she's like, well, maybe you can go become a speaker and help others through your story. And I'm like, well, I really can't do that either because I don't like to get up in front of people. And I had an excuse of why I couldn't do all these different things. Um, but then a nonprofit in the local area had invited me out to an event, and it hadn't been the first time, but it's the first time I actually said yes. I typically didn't like going to those functions. I always felt like people giving me things just always made me feel uneasy. So I didn't want to be the center of attention. I didn't want to take anything that I didn't feel like I earned. But I went. I had a good time. And I went to the organizer and I said, look, I would love to come back, but if I come back, I want to come back as a volunteer to give back to the others. And I think that was just that leadership kind of standpoint that I always had in the military, is always take care of the others before you take care of yourself. And I had those opportunities. And as I started volunteering there, it opened up other things for me. There was companies bringing me in to speak, and um, before I knew it, I was doing all these different things, and I had to sit back for a second and think back to that conversation I had with my mother about, you know, being able to be a public speaker. And one of the things I didn't account for was my military training, especially that of my time as a ranger instructor, where we used to give classes to between 50 and 300 students, and you're always up in front of them, but you always felt comfortable because you knew the information and you were trained to do it. And I just had to take that mindset and put it into the public speaking. And so as I started doing more companies, more nonprofits, doing stuff on Capitol Hill, it gave me the chance to talk to Congress on benefits facing veterans. And the big one at the time, because of my mother being my caregiver, was, you know, these family members or friends would come take care of our wounded and have zero support, no health care, no income, no way to take care of themselves. So they were completely dependent on the disabled veteran to take care of them. And so myself and so many others came together to try to change that. Luckily we did. And, caregivers are better supported now. They have access to mental health care. Um, they get a small living stipend each month. Their basic needs are taken care of, and that no longer um, they're no longer dependent on the disabled veteran for their self care. So as I started doing these things, I met Gary Sinise. who played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump. I know each and every one of you are going, Lieutenant Dan right now in your heads, but that's cool. Um, so I happened to be out in California doing some facial surgeries, and some mutual friends had taken me to the set of CSI New York to go see him film one of his episodes, and I got to hang out with him. Well, first we walked down to the set of CBS and had gone up to his trailer, and they knocked on the door. And when he opened the door, my first reaction was, "Holy F, here's Lieutenant Dan." Uh, but he was dressed in character for Detective Mac Taylor. He had his gun and his badge and the whole bit, but none of us see him that way. So before filming, I got the chance to chat with him for a while, watched him film, hung out with him afterwards, exchanged information, and I kept bumping into him at these different events. And he's like, "Well, when are you going to come help me with my nonprofit?" So I became a volunteer for the Gary Sinise Foundation. And as that went on, then um, they had a couple programs that they need somebody to run. So I came on board as a contractor and started running their programs. And they kept asking me more and more, like, "Can you do this? Can you do that?" And I had to have a sit down with their CEO and say, "Hey, look, if you guys are going to keep, bringing me in for this, why don't we just bring me on as an employee and I work for you guys full time?" And and they loved the idea, and that's kind of how it began. And sitting down with the CEO, Judy Otter at the time, we had to say, okay, what does this look like? You know, um, what do you want me to do? How can I do that with my challenges? And some of the things that were brought up first was medical care. And by the time I had come on board, I wasn't really having surgeries anymore. I still had to go to the VA once in a while. And so we started to think about that. Okay, if there are medical needs that I have to take care of, um, do I burn through all my PTO, all my vacation days, or all my sick days just to be able to meet my basic requirements for the VA? And so the way we kind of mitigated that was they gave me an extra 10 days a year, um, to make sure that all my medical things that I needed to make sure I was functional were still being met, without having to burn the occasional sick day or my vacation time. And that for me was a huge relief. It gave me that security or that peace of mind, saying, okay, if I have to go do these things, that it's not impacting me when I actually need those days. The other part of it was the job they had hired me to do was the manager of outreach, and it required a lot of travel. I was spending about 280 days on the road a year. Um, and so from basically 2009 to 2019, I didn't have a single year where I had over 100 days at home in a single year. And it's very taxing to be on the road that much, living out of a hotel. Um, if you think about when you travel, how much you guys really do on the first travel day. So one of the things I said is, when I travel to the event, I need to go in a day early. Don't bring me into an event or an engagement on the same day, because it's taxing to travel. But then at the time I had prosthetics have to be charged because they're battery operated. Um, and so I need that downtime to make sure my prosthetics are charged, that I'm rested, so that when I go to these events or go to these different engagements, that I'm at my best. And so those were just some of the things that we had to cover before I even came on board. Once I became an employee, um, one of the first things that we kind of realized is, I'm going to have to work and not, do emails and do these different things while traveling. And they wanted to give me a standard laptop. And, if we think about what laptops look like now, they're very thin. Um, they're not very durable. Um, and with the prosthetics, they're basically, there's a little bit of rubber on the inside of the hook, but mostly it's metal. And I'm just going to give you a little tap so you can hear. Um, I always say this is why we don't have nice things, because there's scratches and there's dents, and everything. And I knew if they got me one of those laptops, that I would break it in probably the first day or two. So I was like, look, Panasonic makes these tough books. We we used them in the military. Law enforcement uses them. I mean, I can remember jumping out of airplanes with that in my rucksack, and hitting the ground and know we survived. So I'm like, if I can jump it out of an airplane, it has to be able to survive me. So they went out and they bought me one of these specialized computers that I could travel with, so that I could still fulfill my work duties when I was on the road. And realistically, I think for me personally, um, those were the biggest things that I had to overcome, was making sure that my medical was taken care of, making sure that I did have downtime um, while traveling, just to catch my breath between engagements, and then how I'm going to fulfill my duties when I'm on the road. I also had to maintain an office in California, and I would usually try to get out to California about once a month to go work in the office. And um, because I was in a leadership role, luckily I had my own office, and they set it up for all my needs. Like, again, prosthetics need to be charged, so I had a charging station for my prosthetics. I had a regular computer in there, but there's a few devices that I wanted um, to make my life a little bit easier using the computer. So they bought me the special mouse, and got me the voice recognition system to kind of be able to use voice recognition versus typing. Um, and while I'm pretty good at typing, what I call the one finger peck, uh, it's still, I'd probably say it takes me a couple minutes to knock out a standard email. And when you're getting, 60 emails a day, that, the majority of your day could just be emails. So with that voice recognition software, I can knock them out a lot faster. Um, in 2019, um, I decided to step back from the foundation in a full-time capacity. Um, Again, after 10 years of full-time travel, it just kind of caught up to me where I needed to take a break. Um, you know, when you're on the road that much, you don't eat the healthiest. Even though I try to get some workouts in the hotel gyms, physically, I just knew I wasn't where I wanted to be, and that I needed to take a step back for my own mental health and my own physical health. And we all know what happened. Well, that was December of 19, and we all know what happened in March of 2020, COVID, which the entire nation took a step back. So, had I been a fortune teller, I probably would have just waited for COVID to pass, and then I would have got my break. But I am back to volunteering with them still. Um, I'll actually be in DC next week doing events for them. So life hasn't slowed. I'm back to the speakers network now, working for myself, picking my own engagements. I do still work with several different nonprofits, um, helping them get, well, either fundraising or with their veteran events, um, or coming in and doing some of the different behind the scenes things with them. So I'm still actively engaged. I just now get to pick my own schedule so that I can maintain a nice balance with my mental health and my physical health. Uh, I know there's probably more things on the disability side of things, um, but those were the big ones for me that impacted me. Um, some ones I have seen other people is the wheelchairs. Typically all the bathrooms I ever go into only has one handicap stall. And, we would bring, when I was with Gary Sinise Foundation, we brought wounded veterans in all the time that were in wheelchairs. And though they weren't employees, one of the things I always reminded the other office workers is stay out of that stall. Like, I know so whether I'm in an airport, I'm here, I always go in, somebody's always using it. We need to make sure that stall, those little things are readily available for those that actually need it. So I think it's just being aware of what disabilities could be in and around the office, and then just making sure that um, you're not taking advantage of something that somebody else could really use. on the employment side of things. And so I've worked with a lot of corporations and on hiring initiatives. And one thing I will talk to you, because I know there's people on the call right now that have the ability to hire disabled veterans. And one piece of advice I would like to give you is don't hire somebody just because they have a disability. Hire somebody that's the right fit for your organization or your company. Um, make sure that they're able to do the job. Yes, they might need a little extra time knocking out an email or doing some of the physical work, um, but make sure that they want to be there, that they want to invest in you just as much as you're willing to invest in them. Because um, just like I tell companies with the veterans is, I love my brothers and sisters in arms, but there's a lot of them I wouldn't hire for my own company, or I wouldn't hire as a leader. And it's not because they're bad people, they just weren't the right fit. If I'm going to bring somebody in, I want somebody that wants to be there, that wants to do a good job, that's going to take pride in their work and what the company or the organization is going to do. So um, that's one of my biggest pieces of advice is hiring the right people who are going to be the right fit. I'm going to kind of close it off with that because when I do these things, I really love questions, and hopefully by now that you might have a question or two, um, and maybe for some of the other panelists that you're about to have. But I hope that you guys will ask those questions during this part, because I think for me that's the most beneficial. So again, I appreciate you guys giving me a chance to tell my story, some of my experiences, and I look forward to some of the questions that you guys might have for me.
Thank you so much for sharing. That was really powerful. I know that I personally have a lot of takeaways and a couple things on my mind too. So definitely, if you have specific questions for Michael, please put them in the chat. You can put them in now so you don't forget, and we will address them at the end. So next we have Jennifer Cunningham. She's here with the Star Center as one of our panelists, and she is going to briefly share with us how assistive technology can assist individuals with disabilities in the workplace.
Wow. Thank you for having me this morning. Following up Michael's story is a hard act to follow, I guess I might say. And so I'm just going to take a couple of minutes. I know by looking at the attendees this morning, a lot of you know me, have heard me say a lot of things over the past, especially year since we've been statewide and been meeting with each of the VR regions. But just wanted to kind of back up a little bit. I did see some names I didn't recognize. So just kind of talk about, I appreciated Michael when he was talking about his individualized solution with his tough laptop. So that's something we do every day. So just knowing that Star Center and the assistive technology specialists across the state, we're working for the individual and we're going to try to find the right solution for them. But I wanted to back up a minute and just say, assistive technology is this big fancy word. And really it's nothing more than something that can increase a person's, ability to live, learn potentially, like post-secondary education and work more independently. Assistive technology is not always expensive. Sometimes it is. Some of you counselors may argue with me over that, especially if you're in the sensory services area. But having assistive technology, whether it be a pencil grip or a braille note taker, which are, less than $1 to thousands of dollars, just any type of technology, whether it be low tech or high tech, to level that playing field for people with disabilities is what we're all about. And so I know like I said, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because I've talked to a lot of you over the past little bit, but I've worked here at Star since the year 2000, which seems like a long time ago, but we've actually served VR clients since back in the early 90s. So we're about 30 years into serving voc rehab clients. Now, we started here in West Tennessee. We started small, and now we do have that contract for statewide. But if you think about it, and even when I started here back 20 plus years ago, we were still using the huge CRT monitors that you couldn't like put in your car and go out to show to a client. We actually had a 42-foot bus for many years after I started, that had these big CRT monitors and computer workstations and technology aboard that we used to travel around. And many times I'm asked, why did we get rid of the bus? Well, guess what? Technology has evolved. And so from those big CRT monitors to this little, computer that we all carry in our pockets every day, lots has changed in the last 20 years or so. Um, and just wanted to kind of say too that um, the accessibility features that are built into technology today, to our laptops, to our desktops, to our tablets and our phones, so many accessibility features are even changing the way things are recommended sometimes. There's some really cool new um, accessibility features that have come out even in the last couple of years. Um, a lot of us, I know if you're like me, a lot of times I just, talk to my phone and tell it what to do. Well, 20 years ago when I started in assistive technology, that technology was $1,000 to add to a computer. And now it's built into Windows and Mac products as well as to our phones. More recently, in the last year or so, like on Android, there's Live Transcribe that's built in. It's free, it's there. Android's had it for about a year. Apple, with their most recent update, added it. So having a conversation with a person um, with some type of a hearing loss is much easier these days than maybe it used to be. And even some basic screen reading accessibility features, such as select to speak on the Android platform and spoken content on the iOS system, where the screen will actually read certain text aloud to you. So there's lots of free things out there. Things are not always free. But as I mentioned, just having that individualized solution for each person that we serve across the state is what we strive to do. And we are not just going to hand it to them and say good luck. We're going to make sure that they are able to use it. We're going to work with the individual and with the VR counselor and team to make sure that that solution is what works for that individual, and not stop until we get to the end. So we just want to, again, just make, use assistive technology as the tool, I guess you might say, to level that playing field for people with disabilities. So that could be physical, sensory, learning, intellectual. It doesn't really matter. Our team across the state has a wide variety of backgrounds. I appreciated Michael giving a plug for occupational therapy. We have 3 OTs, including myself, on our team. And so just knowing that we are there to serve your customers. So I appreciate y'all letting me on this morning. And if you have any questions as we get to that part of the session, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. So next we have Levi Stanfield with us today. He is a prior vocational rehabilitation participant and is currently a VR support coordinator covering several counties in East Tennessee. And he's here to kind of start off our panel discussion for us. So Levi, could you introduce yourself and share with us how your disability impacts you at work?
So I'm Levi Stanfield. I am the VR support coordinator for Region 3 at the moment. So some of my disabilities that affect me, I have a learning disability. So it usually takes me a minute or two longer to process stuff, or I might have to proofread an email once or twice just to make sure it's clarified for who I'm sending it to.
And if you were speaking to somebody who has a disability that impacts them at work as well, do you have any advice on how to talk to them about that with their supervisor?
Oh, yes. Always don't be afraid to advocate for yourself, because if you don't, then no one else knows what can do to help. And when you're speaking with your supervisor about certain accommodations that you have to be proficient in the workplace, there's never going to be a negative response. It's always about what they can do to help you reach your goal in your employment, and strive and do the best that you can there.
And a last question I have for you, Levi. What accommodations do you have in place that help you with your day-to-day work that you could share with us?
So some of the accommodations I have, they're not really major compared to some others, but I use Grammarly a lot, and I use the Microsoft Word a lot, proofreading my emails for me just to make sure my punctuation is correct, no misspelled words, that it's a clarified sentence, and then whoever is receiving that.
Awesome. Well, you've definitely been an inspiration to us on our team, just in how you came from VR and are now working with VR and advocating for people with disabilities. Thank you so much for being here. We have 4 members on our panel today. So we have keynote speaker Michael Schlitz. We have Jennifer Cunningham with the Star Center. We have Levi Stanfield, who we just heard from. And we also have Travis Phoenix with us today. Travis is a current VR career coordinator at the Maryville CTRC, a former VR participant and an Army retiree. So he's also available to answer any questions for us today. So Ron Hanners, would you mind reading off any questions you see in the chat for us?
Yes, we have 2 questions for Michael Schlitz. Um, who could, the question is who could we contact on behalf of a veteran who is struggling? That is the first question.
Well, I mean, it depends how they're struggling. If they're a disabled veteran, within the VA system, we have a voc rehab as well. So if they're just in the beginning stages of wanting to go back to school or get specialized training, that's the first people you'd really want to call, is the Veteran Affairs voc rehab. If it's something a little bit more detailed, then there's national organizations that you can reach out to based on what that need is. So if it's a mental health need, Gary Sinise Foundation, Robert Irvine Foundation, and several other organizations, Operation Men, they all have a mental health kind of spectrum that they help veterans with. So I really think it's important to know what the struggle is and then approaching it from that direction.
All right, thank you. Next question is how can we approach the subject in respectful way without being offensive?
I think this is kind of a tough one for some people. Some people don't mind sharing their story, while others it kind of triggers. So I've done it so many times now that um, honestly I don't even think about it much anymore. But every time you tell your story or you talk about your injury, some part of you relives that every single time you say it. So even today, when I was talking about, my men who passed in the attack, burning alive, I relive that every single time. So depending on how comfortable they are, is going to be how you might do it. But what I always say is, people with disabilities are the same as everybody else. Um, they like talking about football. They like talking about the weather, what they did over the weekend. So if you start those regular conversations with them and have normal conversations, and then just naturally let some of those other things come about, let them get comfortable with you. As they get comfortable with you, maybe they'll share a little bit more about their struggles. Um, and then obviously, if you're a leader in charge of that person, it's just a matter of saying, what can I do to help you? how can I best serve you so that your needs are met? And then in turn is they're going to be more productive and they're going to do a better job for you. So if it's just casual conversation, get to know the person first, and then as a leader, just making sure that their needs are met.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for you as well. Do you speak at schools for veterans programs?
I have not spoken at schools for veteran programs, but I have gone into schools and spoken with the children from grade school all the way up to the college level. And I really kind of more focus on the things that veterans bring through your military training. You know, we're very meticulous. We're kind of OCD on a lot of things, and we can bring that into the workforce. So we pay attention to detail. We bring a level of urgency. So I talk about the traits that kind of came from the military, and then just the pride of serving your nation and service to others. I think when you live a life of service to others, whether it's through a nonprofit, charity work, whatever it is, um, the benefits you receive from that on your own are greater than what you're giving. So a lot of times if I'm going into schools, that's the subject matter.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you.
I don't right now see any other questions in the chat. I do have a question of my own. But before I ask that, if anyone else has a question on their mind for Michael or any of the panelists that are here today, please just go ahead and put that in the chat now. My question, Michael, is you mentioned there was a point where you just felt like you lost your identity and, weren't sure what was next, what you were going to be if you weren't a soldier as you were before, in the same way, and, having a lot of like suicidal tendencies in that time. But you were invited to events or, the nonprofit. Was that your main turning point, or how do you feel like you got out of that point from, really not having much hope for your future to, hey, I can contribute um, to society in a really powerful way?
For me, personally, there was two turning points. The first turning point had to do more on the physical level. So I had the chance in November 2007 to be released from the hospital for a few days to fly up to New York to see my unit come back from Iraq. And it was a bunch of my friends and people I had served with, people that were very much like family to me. And, seeing the ceremony, and then that night we did a little get together, and a lot of my close friends were there. And at the time I was still in a wheelchair, and I was still kind of taking my first steps, and I didn't have a lot of strength, still head to toe bandages. And I remember one of my really close friends that I had served with for many, many years had asked me to get up and take a few steps. And at the end of the day, typically my energy level was very, very low, and I just didn't have it in me. And it didn't happen. I couldn't do it. And I always kind of took self pride in the military, always leading from the front, always kind of being on the tip of the spur, as we say, for the physical fitness aspect. Um, so, so emotionally and mentally, that impacted me to the point where I said, okay, the next time my guys see me, the next time my friends see me, I will not be in this condition. I'll not be this weak, and it's the last time they'll ever see me in this state. And so when I got back to the hospital, it kind of lit a fire underneath me to want to learn to walk again, and walking, learn to jogging, to going back to the gym and lifting weights and doing the different things. I mean, if you even Google me, there's a picture that went viral of me doing push-ups. Um, and all that stemmed from that one encounter with my friends of where I didn't get out of my wheelchair to take a couple steps. So that was kind of the forward process for the physical side. Then the mental side, and it's something that not just veterans face. Uh, a lot of people face this, and that's a sense of purpose. and everybody needs a sense of purpose, and everybody's sense of purpose is a little different. Some people get up every day to go to work to provide for their families. Some people go to work, to climb the corporate ladder and kind of reach goals to achieve their idea of success. I've even met people that, their sense of purpose is to make money because that's what they want to do. And while that wasn't what I wanted to do, doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just you need something that gets you out of bed every day. And I think for me personally, giving back to these nonprofits, starting to serve again, um, kind of taking on leadership roles within some of these different organizations kind of provided me that sense of purpose again, to give back to the veteran community. And um, besides needing that sense of purpose and needing something to kind of latch onto, I kind of drew my inspiration from the Vietnam veterans who, had to come home to an ungrateful nation, who had to fight for their benefits. I mean, the benefits I have as a disabled veteran now stem from the fight that the Vietnam veterans had to do for everything that they got. And so we live a better life because that generation took the fight to Capitol Hill. And so if I can do my part now and try to make sure that the generations coming behind me their needs are met, then that's my sense of purpose. I get up every day to give back to the community. Um, but I still remember those dark days. But again, I think it goes down, it comes back to back then, besides identity, besides anything, I didn't have anything getting me out of bed every day.
All right, thank you. Um, have another question. Do you think the mental health services for our wounded veterans have improved over the years? And what areas do you think that need to be improved?
The VA has improved over the years. And I mean, if you watch the news, the Veteran Affairs gets blasted quite a bit. And I'm sure I could take any corporation and dig into the way they're doing things and come up with a million things that they could do better. Um, so I think, the Veteran Affairs isn't any different with that. Back at the beginning of the war, when I talked about kind of the big pyramid, at the beginning we didn't take a lot of casualties, and all of a sudden we took all these different casualties. And in no other time frame, no other conflict had we ever had that many casualties, and it kind of overwhelmed the system. And so that system was playing catch up while all these veterans were coming into it, and they're constantly trying to figure out how can we speed up the process, how can we get these veterans seen. And it took time. It wasn't a 1 year fix, it wasn't a 2 year fix. And we understand veterans were struggling, and veterans were facing hardship. um, but the system itself was working hard to kind of to fix that. And is it perfect now? Absolutely not. um, and I don't think it'll ever be perfect. But as we find those deficiencies, as long as they're constantly trying to do upgrades and procedure changes to fix those deficiencies, then hopefully down the road when something else comes up, that it doesn't take as long for them to make those changes. Um, and then the other part is, I hear veteran affair stories from veterans where their VA is great, and then I hear other stories from veterans where their veteran affairs um, area isn't so great. And so, what I would like to see the VA is kind of have more standard operating procedures and across the board standards where I can go to this facility and it's one way, and when I go to another facility, it's the exact same way. And unfortunately, it's not that way right now. And sometimes it's because of leadership, sometimes it's because of the area. But when I find um, people with stories where their VA isn't, then I try to push that up the chain and let the people in charge that I know say, hey, look, this needs to get fixed. So it's a team effort. I think everybody who hears a story or sees a deficiency should speak up, because that's how real change is made.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Another question. Um, you mentioned resources for caregivers. Is there a central contact for caregivers who need support?
There is. It's the National Caregivers something. It's with it. If you look up on va.gov and look up caregivers, you can read up on how to apply for caregiver status. There is a process to it. So, like, God forbid the day that mom can't be my caregiver anymore, and if I still want a caregiver, and I bring somebody else in, there is training that they have to go through initially. Um, there's interview process to make sure that emotionally and physically able to do the job, and then once all that stuff is taken care of, uh, then that opens up the doors for their health care, for counseling, for their stipend, and everything else.
Okay, thank you. Um,
It's caregiver.va.gov, by the way.
okay, can you post that in the chat?
I'll have Kamisha do it.
Okay, all right.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right, one other question. Um, this is for Michael, and it says Corey, but I mean, I'm not sure. I'll just read it, and whoever wants to answer it, here we go. All right. We know all veterans experiences are not the same. Can you share your perspective on how serving those that were frontline gunfighters may require different approaches than serving vets who didn't fight day in and out? And how do we approach serving the Army Ranger versus IT tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love this question. And what I say it comes down to is perspective, right? And so when you talk about, like, frontline combat soldier who from the time they come in the military are trained and to somewhat mentally handle those challenges. So, we dehumanize targets and that it's just a target, it's not a person, you know. Um, and so we build this kind of a way to deal with these tragedies. But now let's just, for sake, say, okay, I was finance, right? And so I get sent to Iraq as a finance officer, and I never think I'm going to see conflict because I'm more about the numbers. But all of a sudden, I get put in a convoy to go to a small camp to do payroll or take care of financial issues. And on that way to that small camp, my convoy gets ambushed, whether it's a gunfire or an IED. And I don't have the same level of training as that combat soldier. That trauma, that level that I just saw is going to affect me differently than that infantryman. Um, and so it's really kind of a fine line on what you say um, is expected trauma versus trauma. Um, Everybody's going to handle that differently. And, what about the veteran, say, served 4 years, got out, never deployed, but then his unit deployed and he just, 3 or 4 guys he served with were killed. That's trauma. So it's very, you shouldn't treat anybody differently. You should just assume um, on some level that veteran has something. Um, and whatever it is, it's going to be relative to that veteran. So my trauma isn't the same as your trauma, but it's still trauma. And I don't think you should compare injuries. You shouldn't compare um, stuff like that. And I've come in my own personal experience where um, veterans who have PTS, um, post-traumatic stress, or they have a traumatic brain injury, a TBI, and they say, man, I wish I would have lost a leg, or I wish I would have lost an arm so people could see that I'm injured. And I'm like, man, I'm very lucky. Like, I'm articulate. I can form my thoughts. Um, I can do these different things. All my injuries are very, very physical. So I'm the lucky one. You know, my brain works. We don't know enough about how the brain operates just to fix these things. So if I were to compare, I'd say that the physical injuries have it easier than the mental injuries. Um, but it's not important. It's whatever's relevant to that particular veteran. And then the second part of your question, how do we serve Rangers versus, other veterans? Look, the needs are the same. Um, when the veterans get out of the service, they all need jobs. They all need a sense of purpose. They all need a community to rely on. They all need that support network. Um, and the thing of it is they can all be trained. So even if you have a veteran coming out of the IT realm in the military who might have some of the basic knowledge, doesn't mean you can't take that ranger um, and train them up to do that exact same job. If you think about training in the military from day one, whether you serve 3 years or 20 years or 30 years, you're always constantly put into new roles. You're constantly put into new duty positions. And you have to get spun up on it. I mean, you have to there's some training provided to you, but there's a lot of training that you have to do on your own to get yourself ready for that. So one of the great characteristics I say that veterans bring is the ability to be taught.
All right, thank you. And I'll tell you, Michael, there's a lot of thank yous in the chats if you want to read them and they enjoying your story. I do want to read this one. It says, thank you for stating that everyone needs, excuse me, thank you for stating that everyone needs to be treated the same, no matter their disability. Working with veterans and active duty service members transposes into regular disability services in that you should treat all people the same way and give them the respect as an individual. So I just wanted to read that. Um, I don't see any more questions at this time. If you have any more questions, please post them. Otherwise, I will turn it back over to Kristen. And back to you, Kristen.
Oh, I was muted. Any last questions before we round things up today? A lot more thank yous coming in the chat. I hope you can see those, Michael. We've really appreciated having you and hearing your story and your perspective. That's really important for all of us. And, we all have some sort of connection, whether it be through work or family or personal experience, to a veteran with a disability in the community. So we just really, really appreciate that. I think at this point, I will turn it over to you, Kamisha.
Thanks, Kristen. I just want to say a little thank you to everyone. This concludes our training today. However, I want to say thank you to everyone who attended. We hope you enjoyed it and walk away with newfound knowledge about disabilities in the workplace. Um, and then the next slide, I would like to give a special acknowledgement to Mr. Michael Schlitz, Levi Stansfield, and Jennifer Cunningham. Thank you for being so gracious and sharing your stories and your knowledge with us. I would also like to send a special shout out to the planning committee who did amazing this year. Kristen Martin, who moderated, Corey, who always does a great job overseeing us in our committee meetings. Travis, who booked our speaker today. Wanda also supported that. Kristen, who just came in on the clutch with all of our tech issues and concerns and solved all my issues and problems that I had concerning marketing this event. And Ron Hanners, this is our third year presenting an NDEAM, and I'm happy to have a partner in crime such as you. Thank you so much and have a great day, everyone.